Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Monday Night Must See TV with the Hudson Valley Squares. It's Thrash week here on the channel. It's Thrash night here on the Squares. Before we get to the topic, let me introduce the crew. We got a special guest here today. You've seen him over on Steve Keeler's Rock Fantasy Files. Mr. Tony Dio Leonard is in the house. What's going on, Tony?
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
You got it, man. Good to have you. We got the guy who's the rock of this show. Mr. Ryan Scow is here. We got Bryce from Bryce Talks Metal. Our center square is the king himself, Mr. Chris Allo. Rob Lasante is in the house. And Count Ralphus himself, Ralph Tambor, is in the house. What's happening, folks?
What up?
What's going on, fellas?
California thrash versus German thrash. That is the topic for tonight. We have taken 8 bands, 4 pillars of the California scene, 4 pillars of the German scene. In the 80s, all 8 of these bands were doing all sorts of cool stuff. Part of the 90s might have been tough for some of them, but for most of these bands, they've come back stronger than ever in the 2000s. So we're going to kind of take a look at like 1980 to 1995 and then like 96 through today and talk about who did it better back then and who's doing it better now. So let's start, since we're all from the States here. We're going to start in the United States. We're going to start in California. So the 4 bands in question are Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, and Testament. We had lots of discussions over who that 4th band would be. You know, maybe Exodus has a couple of years on Testament, but we all kind of felt that Testament is kind of the stronger band of the two. So we went with Testament to round off our 4 square there. And over in Germany, of course, we've got Kreator, Destruction, Sodom, and those beer guzzlers Tankard, right? So those are the 8 bands we're going to talk about. So we're going to let our special guest here, Mr. Tony Dio, get us started in this conversation. So let's start with the Americans, right? The Californians. Your take on kind of what Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Testament were kind of doing to start their career in the 80s, and how successful you think they were at just really jumpstarting this whole kind of genre here, or subgenre of metal, and who you think like some of their influences were to kind of start this new exciting sound.
Well, going from just reading books on some of these bands in the past, I mean, they all started out, with the, garage band, just like every other band starts. And they all had influences coming. They liked a lot of the new wave of British metal, which was, coming out in 79, 1980. And they also liked stuff like Michael Schenker Group, UFO, Thin Lizzy. Van Halen, a lot of this stuff that was just hard rock in general for the U.S. at that time. And they, all 4 of them, had, massive success with it. Metallica and Slayer kind of kicking things off in 83. And I'm sure those 2 bands alone were influences on everything that followed from that scene, including, Testament and Megadeth came out of Metallica. You got to wonder what, Megadeth was kind of out of spite. He's going to see what he could do to be as bigger and badder than Metallica, that is. So, I like all these bands, and I'm not a huge Megadeth fan. I do love Peace Sales, a great album. I love Rust in Peace quite a bit. And In My Darkest Hours, my favorite Megadeth song from the So Far, So Good, So What. Don't really care much about the rest of that album, but that song is great. But of course, Ride the Lightning, just that this album changed my life. This is what got me into thrash metal. This is the first Metallica I heard, and just kind of went from there. And that's how I discovered all the thrash, including all the German and European bands as well. But Testament put out some great stuff here in the early days. The Legacy, the New Order, through Practice What You Preach. I could kind of see them trying to go a little commercial by the time of Practice What You Preach. And that kind of brings me to that era from Metallica's Black Album. Metallica was just like the top of everybody's like thrash heat there for a while. Black Album comes out, they're really commercial, but they had massive success with it. And then all the bands from that scene started trying to have something, catchy and commercial as well. They wanted a hit album as well. So, I mean, Megadeth had already, started experimenting with that. But you start seeing Testament when they were going into the Ritual and Souls of Black, definitely the Ritual. I'll be honest, I have never owned the Ritual or Souls of Black. I couldn't tell you, I've never heard them in full. For some reason, by then I had got burnt out with them by the time Practice What You Preach came out, and they had changed a little bit. It wasn't as heavy as the first two. But from there, Slayer, I mean, Slayer's first 5 albums, I mean, just awesome. They're just great records. I mean, my favorite is definitely the first album, and also South of Heaven. And after probably after Seasons in the Abyss, I mean, they started going more commercial around that period. But I can't really say that Slayer was like Metallica commercial. I mean, they didn't have any hit ballads like The Unforgiven or anything like that, But they still, I don't know, they just changed. It seems like some of those albums that came out after Season in the Abyss were a little more like following trends. They started sounding kind of new metal and kind of jumping on some stuff like that. And I do like some stuff that's on God Hates Us All, and on I do like some of the stuff on Divine Intervention as well. But it seems like after God Hates Us All, I haven't purchased another record by them, actually. So I mean, it is what it is. 85 to 91 was the golden age of thrash for all of it, European, American, all of it. And all of these bands have their own unique sound, and the areas have their own sound. You have the Bay Area, California kind of has a fuck you attitude about it, where the European bands seem to be a little more, I don't know, I guess I would say a little more refined, a little more intelligent sometimes. But you have, bands like, you got your New York bands like Overkill and Anthrax, Nuclear Assault. You had, Canadian thrash, Annihilator, Razor, Sacrifice. All of these bands kind of have whatever area they came from. They had their own sound,
sure,
own style, So we'll just go from there right now. That's what that's my take on the U.S. Canada scene, California scene.
So Ryan, moving over to Germany. Obviously, I don't know if you were a little bit too young, but I remember at the time, I'm sure Chris, Rob, and Tony and Ralph would probably remember this. First time you heard like Kreator and Destruction and Sodom, it's pretty extreme at the time, right? Even though we had Slayer, but like those Germans all of a sudden were doing something totally different.
Yeah.
Where do you think, Ryan, where do you think they got all that from?
So the German bands, I mean, those bands, especially early Sodom, was a huge influence on. And Sodom's my favorite of those 4 bands too. But they were a big influence on like a lot of what came like later with black metal. Like you see a lot of interviews with like the early black metal bands. Kreator was definitely in there. Destruction was in there. I don't remember reading about Tankard so much in that context, but like in the Sign of Evil and Obsessed by Cruelty, and even like Persecution Mania, like you're talking like 84, 85, 87, 88. Yeah, that was big in that. I'd say a lot of it came from Venom. Definitely came from Venom.
For sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because Venom was like, they were the godfathers of like black and death metal. And then you had Hellhammer and stuff. But man, Sodom and Destruction were really early on there. So that's one of that times in metal where almost like, and I've said this to Hellhammer too, and even Celtic Frost, it's like something came from nothing. Like you hear like In the Sign of Evil. It's like, what the fuck did this come from? Like you had, because the first Bathory album was 84. So you can't even say they were influenced by it because it all came out at the same time. And In the Sign of Evil was 84 too. Destruction had Sentence of Death, which was 84. Awesome, yeah. And then, Infernal Overkill was just a year later. I mean, I would even want to say they were, I mean, I know like Slayer had Show No Mercy in 83, but that was only a year prior. So you figure this stuff gets written, recorded, and by the time it comes out, you can't even really, were they really listening to like Show No Mercy and was influential? I don't know, it's too soon. So yeah, but the that early era of those German bands was fucking crazy, and it was raw as shit. I'd say comparatively, I mean, the first Slayer gets bagged a little bit for being kind of raw. I don't really feel that way. It's just what I like. But like Ride the Lightning, or not Ride the Lightning, Kill 'Em All, Definitely Bonded by Blood from Exodus. I know the first Megadeth gets a lot of shit, but I feel like it's comparatively pretty good. And certainly by Peace Cells, like that's a tight album. Testament was tight. The Germans were way fucking sloppier. I heard this joke years ago where on the earliest Sodom stuff, Tom Angel Rippers, they blast along and he goes, ugh, throws out those fucking grunts. And that was the signal to the rest of the band. All right, guys, change riffs or change time signatures or speed up and slow down. Because it was like a shambles. It was barely held together on the very earliest stuff, like Chris Witchhunter, the drummer for Sodom early on, and Tommy, the drummer for Destruction early on. You could definitely hear that Abaddon from Venom thing where they're just like, man, I hope I'm still playing the same fucking song as these guys, just holding on for dear life. Kreator, definitely, Ventor playing drums on the early Kreator stuff. I mean, he's been their drummer the whole time, but like an Endless Pain from Kreator from '85, they're just, and I love that. I love that personally, but he's just blasting away full force. You're like, I think we're still playing the same song, guys. Keep it up. I always found that endearing. Yeah, great album. Good stuff. And those bands tightened up quickly, too. Like, once you go a little further in their discography, you didn't have that same thing. But early on, I love it. But, that earliest stuff from those guys. Tankard, not so much. Tankard was a little later and a little more refined out of the gate. But definitely Sodom Destruction and Kreator right out of the gate. Those guys were raw as shit. Usually by the second album, they were tightened up, but yeah.
I think if you listen
to
Tankard today, and listen to the old stuff and the newer stuff, I think out of the four German bands, they more closely follow what was going on in the US as opposed to what their fellow countrymen were doing. Because to me, there's a kinship between the other three that you don't quite get with Tankard. I'm not saying it's any worse or whatever. It's just, to me, those three they have a certain German sound, whereas Tankard seems to me like they were kind of following what was going on here a little bit. Chris,
I'm sorry. Yeah, they're obviously a classic German band, but I never associated them as much with there was always like the German trilogy of bands. And then there's a lot of other ones like Assassin and Holy Moses. And, there's definitely like a second ring of bands where I kind of put Tankard. But, when you think of the big three, it was always Kreator, Sodom, and Destruction.
Yeah. And it's funny, you kind of hinted where I wanted to go next. So I think once, you had these early albums from these German bands, which were very raw, very chaotic, very kind of extreme at the time. Chris, do you think the success of Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer as the 80s started to wind down, you think that affected what the Germans were doing? Because if you start listening to like Kreator and Destruction and Sodom by like the start of the 90s, all of a sudden you wonder if the record labels are like, oh, we want a next Metallica album out of you guys a little bit.
100%. It's not just record labels, it's band managers and every other hanger-on and every other employee associated with those bands. The music business, everybody follows trends, and no doubt about it. Once Metallica, it wasn't like Metallica was an overnight success, but, once Master of Puppets hit, every record just kept getting bigger and bigger. It was just an unstoppable freight train. And once that Black Album hit, holy shit. And yeah, I am sure every record company was like, we need you to be the next Metallica. So that's why Testament, yeah, you got to write a fucking ballad. And yeah, you're going to literally call it The Ballad and put that on your fucking record. Because you guys are going to be the next big thing. And you guys got to stop, being so dirty looking and get nicer looking Reeboks and wash up a little bit. And no doubt, I am sure it affected both acts on both sides of the pond. Because listen, while Metallica was a fucking juggernaut, by what 1990, 91, Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax were all doing huge business.
Yeah.
So it's not like, like for me, the one thing that's always taking it off subject, like Pantera, there was no second Pantera. They were like the weird oddity. But like, okay, you had Metallica, but then you clearly had Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax, who were all selling a ton of records and who were selling a ton of concert tickets. And I mean, hell, the three of them teamed up together in 1991, just as grunge was about to break, and they were headlining arenas. I mean, they sold out Madison Square Garden. That's ridiculous. You know, nobody, listen, to take the other side, you know, Kreator, Destruction, and Sodom, all of whom I love. Okay, the biggest they probably ever did was what, the Ritz in New York City? And to me, on this whole equation, Tankard is a fucking non-issue. I mean, those guys, they've never, right? I don't think they ever did a U.S. tour. Maybe they did a festival somewhere. I mean, I saw them at Wacken Open Air once. I thought they kind of sucked. They were sloppy because they were literally spilling beer all over the place.
Sure.
But
that's part of the show.
That's their gimmick, right? They're like Guar with beer.
Yeah.
But yeah, to me, it's the big three, as Ryan said. But yeah, no doubt the success of Thrash in the late '80s into the very tip of just the early '90s, I'm sure was an influence on everybody trying to soften their sound and trying to sell more records and more concert tickets.
Yeah. So Ralph, we talked about it on the Ranking the Album show at Destruction a little bit yesterday. So it's not that the German bands didn't try, right? They came over here, they toured, their records were, you can get their records as an import or whatever. Do you think maybe they were just a little too extreme for more mainstream type stuff here in the States?
Sure. And that's what was great about them. And they weren't getting played on Headbangers Ball. They didn't even really have like videos. Sodom barely ever toured America. That hurt them. They should have been 10 times bigger. And like Chris was saying about Tankard, I just seen today they announced this big European tour, and all these people are saying, "Oh, come to Brazil." But there was a whole bunch of people going, "Are you ever going to come to the U.S.?" Like even now, like I don't know if they've ever even been over here.
I've never
and
seen
that really hurt them. They got 18 albums, and they never bothered to tour. Or I don't know if it's that, or if the label couldn't get them over here. I'm sure they wanted to come over, but that really hurt their like anybody knowing about them in the States. I love their early albums. Their first 3 albums were the only ones I really knew. I got Zombie Attack right behind me, but those ones in the 90s, like I didn't even see them in stores or nothing. And out of all these bands, they're the most active band out of all of them. They got like 18 full-length albums, and I listened to a couple of their 2000 albums, and they sound exactly the same. They got that fun, kind of almost like a crossover feeling to them. They're like a party thrash band, but they're still fast and heavy, and they stayed really true to their sound,
Totally.
But yeah, what you were saying about Metallica, though, that affected the whole thrash scene. Like it was so many bands. I remember Overkill had a video, and they had the long black wristbands. They were all wearing black, and so many bands were trying to look like them, and they were not really trying to sound so much like them, but they were trying to capture that image. And it really opened the doors for me for thrash to be like over with and go into death metal and the more extreme music, because all the bands wanted the success from Metallica, and I found that boring. So I went with the bands that either kept it heavy or found all these new bands that were the big first wave of metal.
I think it's funny too. It's so common, like what you guys are saying, for bands to like, well, Metallica got big and all these bands got big. When a band like Sodom in '92 puts out an album like this, Tapping the Vein, which is borderline death metal, it's not the best thing they did, but it's a good album. But for like speed and heaviness, it's a fucking beast. It stands out because no other thrash band from like the old guard was like, let's get heavier and faster and nastier and dirtier. Nobody did that. So you get an album like this, it's like, it's bucking the trend, and it's a real exception to the rule. And they didn't stay on this path. They went another direction and decided they wanted to sound like Motorhead after this for a little while. But yeah, in like '92, a thrash band to do that was like way out of character because of what you guys were saying. Because I'd agree, Metallica and that whole success from all these other bands, selling billions of tickets and T-shirts and stuff.
Destruction did the opposite. With Destruction, tried to sound like the Bay Area bands. They lost Schmear. They put out the Cracked Brain album. It was a good album, but they're followers where they were leaders. There was nobody like Destruction. They were such a unique band and so influential to the death metal and black metal scene, just like Sodom. So for those bands to try to jump onto something else, it's horrible. They should have just
it was.
They were great at.
I was going to say Testament on the other side of the fence, right? With the Demonic record, what was that, like 1996? I mean, that's practically a fucking death metal record. The pendulum swung the other way. They're like, okay, going commercial didn't really help us. let's try this other way. I mean, I like that record. It was brutal. I don't know how well it sold, but they gave it a shot.
That's the album that put them back on the map for me. Like that's when I started paying attention again. But at the same time, I felt like it kind of reminds me of like when Painkiller came out. It's like they had these two shitty albums, in my opinion, and then they're like, we better go back to being heavy, and it's almost like a forced thing.
Yeah, contrived. Yeah.
Yeah, contrived. Like we better try to keep up with all this. We're going to be done, and it did work with them. That was a good plan for them.
Right, and the next one for them was The Gathering, which took a lot of the heavy influences, but then they went back to a more traditional sound. So
yeah, they balanced both of them, but they ended up on for a lot of like really good albums throughout those 2000s.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I had kind of lost interest after Practice What You Preach, and but I remember a friend of mine who he had pretty much wrote them off a while back, and he called me, says like, man, you got to hear the New Testament record Load. They've got James Murphy on guitar now, from Death and Obituary, and man, when I first heard that, I was like, man, Chuck's singing in more growling vocal, and that's when I started paying attention again, and they just started putting really good records out again. Yeah.
Very good.
That's probably my top Testament album.
Which one, Low or?
Yep.
That's my two favorites ever, is The Gathering and Low. I don't know. I'm glad to hear you say that, because it's usually not a common opinion, but yeah, those are definitely my two favorites.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Rob, your take on the whole scene for both of them in the 80s?
Well, listen, you guys know I didn't get into, like Tony was talking about, I really didn't get, and even though I'm the oldest in the group here, I didn't really get into thrash until much later, because when I first discovered thrash with friends of mine who loved thrash, and I just, for some reason, it didn't click with me right away in the earlier 80s. It clicked with me, and all guys talked about it, was when Metallica came out with Ride the Lightning. And that kind of clicked it for me. Ride the Lightning came out, and I started to get interested in thrash. And then Master of Puppets, which is my personal favorite Metallica album, really got me into Metallica. And then, of course, it got me later on into Megadeth. And you guys were talking about Megadeth. I mean, the first couple of albums are great, but I love Peace Sells, and I love, of course, this album. Rest in Peace. To me, it's my favorite Megadeth album of all time.
It's the greatest album of all time.
And it's funny, we talked about, and of course, Slayer. Slayer was another one. I remember I was working, it was in the late 80s, and I was driving a truck, and I don't know, I was in a record store, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna check out Slayer. I didn't really know Slayer yet. I mean, I heard of him, but I just didn't really listen to him. So I bought what did I buy? Rain of Blood and Seasons in the Abyss. Those are my two that I ever bought first. And I got to tell you, I was driving the truck, and I really got into them. And that's how I got into Slayer. And then, of course, later on with Testament, I got into Testament when I saw them open up with Priest and Megadeth on that 1990 tour at the, where was it, in Jersey. And that's how I became a big Testament fan. From that day on, I became a big Testament fan. I mean, I love Testament. I think for Testament, they've actually, even in the last few albums, have been great. I mean, they've been playing great music. They're really, flying the flag for. I mean, yeah, sometimes they can be a little bit more heavy metal than thrash. And I know you got so getting into like the Kreator and Destruction and Sodom. Now, Tankard, I didn't even know about. Just until recently, till you guys talked about it. I had no idea who Tankard was. But Kreator, I heard about in the 2000s. Phantom Antichrist, and then Violent Revolution. Those albums, I like that album a lot, actually. But I got into, a friend of mine told me about Kreator, and I started listening to some of their music. And for me, Kreator, I don't know why, but it sounded more like what we do here. Compared to like Sodom. Sodom is really heavy. I mean, that's like Brian was saying, really heavy, really fast. And I bought this not too long ago, not just for the show, but because everybody talks about it on the show. So I bought this one, 40 years. And then I got this, the Destruction, and then watched the show with Pete and Ralph. And I got to say, that Destruction for me, I don't know if I mean, this Thrash Anthems is great though. And then of course, like some of the songs you guys were talking about on the show, Mad Butcher, Antichrist, Diabolical. Well, there's a lot of good stuff coming out of Germany. I'm not saying it's not. I just never got big into the German scene, except for maybe, like I said, a little bit of the Kreator, and of course the classic Accept and Primal Fear and bands like that I got into. But so if you're gonna ask me who I sway more to the American, California scene, of course, for me. But that's my take on it. But not saying that those bands are bad. Tankard I try to get into, and when Pete gave us this assignment, and for some reason I don't know why I just can't get into them. I can't tell you why. So
they're kind of like a joke band, but musically,
Yeah.
really good stuff going on there. Because I've heard a handful of Tankard albums here and there over the years, but I don't own any of them. But getting ready for the show, I listened to a whole bunch of them, and I kind of dig it. There's some good stuff, there's some not so good stuff. But what's really cool about talking about this topic and having a guy like Bryce on, because Bryce wasn't even born yet when all of these bands were first hitting. So a lot of us, Ryan's a little bit younger, but most of us were digesting this stuff as they were coming out. So for someone like Bryce, who's coming into this with a clean slate, I really want to hear from you. Like, when you first started listening to metal and listening to thrash, you obviously heard of, at that point, you're like, okay, these are all these bands that everybody talks about. I got to go and discover them. And we know Megadeth is like your favorite band of all time, or one of them. But like, how does like the rest of these bands, like, how did you feel your first time discovering Slayer and Metallica and Megadeth and Testament and Destruction and all these bands? Like, what was that like for you?
It was pretty awesome. I'll say, like, when I was about 9 or so, my dad got me an MP3 player and had some songs on there. So it was like, of course, he had Metallica on there. He's not as into like the deeper stuff, the German stuff, but he put some Metallica on there. So like, For Whom the Bell Tolls and all that was kind of my first introduction to thrash, I would say, and I absolutely loved it. And then when I was about a year later or so, we're just at Walmart. I pick out Back to the Start, the greatest hits, the 2005 Megadeth greatest hits album. And that's when I first heard Megadeth, and they became my favorite band. And then just as time went on, I got into each band kind of sporadically and randomly. And of course with like iTunes and all that and YouTube, that's how I first listened to a bunch of these bands. It's really convenient to just search up anything I want to hear. And I kind of have differing opinions from a lot of y'all on like my favorite albums and kind of eras from these bands. Like Sodom, love the early stuff, but it's kind of old at this point. But M16 and Code Red, definitely my favorites by them. Really love that period of the band. Even uh yeah, I mean, Testament, again, I love The Ritual. I know some of y'all were making faces at that album. Electric Crown is just an amazing song, great riff. Don't see any problem with it at all. I don't really think they got too commercial or anything. But yeah, Tankard again, like most of y'all, I don't love them, but I do love those first two albums, Chemical Invasion and Zombie Attack. Sodom, missed them at Hell's Heroes, would have been cool to see. I'm sure they were great live, Ryan.
They were
I'm sure you
great.
can say. Yeah. Yeah, and Kreator, I love the early stuff. I am big into black metal, so I like the kind of darker stuff that they were putting out with like Endless Pain and whatnot. I do love some of their stuff up through the 2000s, Enemy of God, and some of that stuff. But Megadeth is easily, to me, the best. I think they got the best mix of speed, technicality, musicianship, all coming together. The songwriting, first 6 albums, not a bad song on them at all to me. Um, yeah, and got to shout out Nick again. He gave me this super cool signed picture of the Rust in Peace lineup signed by the whole band. Freaking
Awesome.
amazing. Oh yeah, that's my favorite.
Bryce, what do you think of the last 2 albums, Megadeth?
I like them a lot.
Life and the Dying and Dystopia.
Yeah, I like them a lot. I like Dystopia a little bit better. I remember I was in like my college dorm room, like 2016, just waiting for midnight to hit. And as soon as it hit, I absolutely loved all the songs. Loved Kiko Loureiro's playing. Chris Adler, really great drummer, just super powerful drums on that. And Megadeth, even through the 2000s, I think we're putting out like the most consistent and best albums, even from the shirt here. System Has Failed, I love. Top 5 Megadeth albums for me. I got Endgame and United Abominations in my top 5. I think they were just absolutely amazing. Love Chris Broderick on Endgame. I think the Drover brothers did really well too on that United Abominations. But yeah, Megadeth rules all.
All right.
It's good that you come into metal when there's just a whole plethora of material out from all of these bands, where a lot of us, we just grew up with it. You know, we listened album by album as they came out each year, every other year. And that's cool that you can discover something like that, you know. I think that might be why I'm kind of biased when it comes to the early material, because it's what I got into. It's what they had out when what was their newest product when I got into it. And I was all about those records. And as they grew, I kind of grew out of the band. Don't really like what they do later. You know, you came in with, you know, just wide eyed, you know, to all of it. So I mean, like if we were talking about like Celtic Frost or something, you'd say, oh, I like Cold Lake, you know, because you were, you know,
I don't mind it as much,
you know, but you know what I'm saying? Then somebody that was there, they went, oh God, what are they doing? You know? So,
yeah,
yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
So real quick before we kind of wrap up, just quickly talking about the last 30 years, right? Because we've kind of been focusing on the early years. If everybody could kind of say which side they prefer from the early years, and maybe your top 2 or 3 favorite albums across, you know, all the bands we're talking about. So Tony, why don't I start with you for the California scene and the German scene from the early days?
That's really a tough one, because that's where I love all these bands, is all the early day stuff. And I'm gonna lean more towards the California stuff, because that's what I got into first. Like I said, I'm getting be biased on something here. But a lot of these albums, the early albums from these bands, like for instance, this is my favorite Kreator album, Terrible Certainty.
Mine too.
And a lot of these albums that I got and discovered were probably 89, 90, when Camelot Music was getting rid of all their vinyl, and you could just go in and you could buy this record for $2. And they had all this, you know, Metal Blade, Combat, you know, all the stuff, Megaforce, all that stuff. You could just find it. And I'll take a chance on this, you know, and a lot of it just ended up being some of my favorite albums of all time. That Tankard album we mentioned, one of the coolest album covers. I mean, it's called Zombie Attack, but you got Universal Monsters sitting with the guy that maybe they're watching Night of the Living Dead or something, you know. But I love that album cover. It's just great. So, you know, when we all came from the time when we go in the store and we flip through and see an album cover and take a chance on something sometimes, you know. So that being said, I mean, I still love the early days of the German stuff as well, but I guess I'll have to pick and say that I would lean more towards the California scene in this particular topic, because I mean, like I said, Ride the Lightning changed my life, and I love the Slayer stuff, and I love the early Testament stuff and the early Megadeth stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of hard when you got Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, Rain in Blood, and, you know, Rust in Peace and Peace Cells. It's tough.
Two of my favorite Destructions, you know, Mad Butcher EP. Love this album cover. Of course, I got Infernal Overkill t-shirt on tonight, you know, and Sodom. I mean, favorite Sodom stuff from the early days. Persecution Mania and Agent Orange, for sure. Okay. I read something the other day that said Agent Orange is one of the biggest selling German thrash albums of all time.
Yeah, I think it's sold over 100,000 copies. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's right at the peak.
Yeah. And it's funny because they were pushing, I was going to bring that up before, and Ryan was talking about the album that comes after that. You know, Agent Orange, they wanted that album to be their big breakthrough album. But
yeah.
You listen to it, it's no less crazy than the albums that came before it.
No, you know, and we're talking about, you know, how big Metallica got, and these labels wanting all these bands to have hits. I mean, who would have ever thought that Metallica would be the biggest metal band in the world, would actually completely change things? Because, you know, I mean, you guys that are like my age, you know, listening to Metallica when it was new, and you had friends going, what kind of crap is this? What are you listening to? You know, what is that noise? And some people that I remember saying that to me, Metallica's like their favorite band now. Yeah. But they didn't jump on board until the Black Album.
And the funny thing, Tony, is that, you know, the Black Album, I remember when I came out, and, you know, there was a couple songs I liked, but I got to say, I think that the reason it got so big is it was a crossover album. to me was a crossover to all the other metal that there is out there, and everybody could get into it, and it was accessible. Whereas, you know, the first album was not. It was thrashy, it was heavy, you know, it was different. There was no
Sure,
ballads
yeah.
really on that, you know. It's totally different. And that's where a lot of the hardcore fans from the early 80s got, that's why they got out of Metallica. They were like, they sold out, blah, blah, blah. You know, you heard all the comments and stuff. You know,
It's very smart when you think about it. That album was kind of right place, right time, because their momentum was on such an incline that I think if they would have put out And Justice for All 2, I don't think they would have peaked much higher than they already were at. But that album allowed them to go way over the top, because it was
that was the last time I saw them too. I saw them on that tour. Yeah.
I was just gonna say it's kind of interesting. You say like when Metallica was first coming out, that was some of the heaviest and fastest stuff. But like for me, whenever I was in high school, whenever I would try to tell a friend about Megadeth, and they're like, "What is that?" Like, and I'm like, you know, Metallica, like it's kind of like them. So I have to always make that comparison,
Yeah.
even though I like Megadeth way better and whatnot. But of course, they all know Metallica from
Of course,
the radio songs and whatnot now. But
Guitar Hero.
household name.
yeah.
All right, Ryan, what side of the fence do you sit on, and what are some of your favorite albums from this time period?
Well, when we first started discussing this on the chat we got, it was pretty easy because at first we kind of like narrowed it down to the Bay Area, San Francisco, and then we swapped some bands out, and Slayer got in there. So Slayer was my introduction to metal. Hell Awaits is still probably my favorite album of all time, any genre. But yeah, Slayer was the band for me, and I never had that intro where like, you know, like, oh, I heard like AC/DC or Def Leppard from my older brother. I just went from like 0 to 60, from nothing to Slayer, like overnight, and that's where I started. So let's see. So the American bands, but yeah, right as soon as I got into them, like I got into Metallica like within like 2 months. You know, it was like right out, like, oh, you like this? Check this out too. I actually was in a class in school, and a guy just came up and put headphones on me and was playing Battery by Metallica. And like, all right, well, this is fucking cool. I'm into the sound. So once you start mixing the Bay Area bands more with the LA bands, Slayer being an LA band, the LA bands are always more to my taste. Like then you have like bands like Dark Angel and Possessed, which are just faster and darker. And that's just always, you know, the kind of stuff that I drifted towards earlier on. But yeah, like so Metallica, I am one of those guys where they put out 4 albums, the whole band died in an airplane accident, and they were replaced by robots, and everything that came out after Injustice for All is, I don't know, it's not Metallica. Sex robots from Mars, who the fuck knows? It ain't, you know. I don't like a single song past Injustice for All. I am one of those guys. With a lot of these bands, I kind of fall on that side of the fence. Megadeth, I'm saying my favorite albums are Peace Sells and Rust in Peace, which I feel is like a pretty common thing. But the first 4 albums are all great. And actually, I love the first Megadeth album. It doesn't get a lot of love. You know, people are like, it's too sloppy, it's too raw. They blow all their money on drugs. Maybe they did. Maybe it is. But I like it a lot. I think the songs are great. I think Dave sounds pissed off as fuck. I like the sloppiness of it. I like the fact that they're just like, fuck Metallica. We just want to be the nastiest band alive. And it's an angry album. And I was actually, when I heard the remaster of it, I'm like, he tried to clean it up too much. Like he tried to take out that drugged up, fucked up, pissed off, angry, and make it sound like this professional product, which it's not. Like, you know, it's putting lipstick on a pig. It's a nasty album. That's what I liked it. Testament, I don't know. I like Testament. Never one of my favorite bands. Electric Crown is a great song, which is an opinion I've only come around to in the last couple of years, because I didn't really ever like The Ritual or Souls of Black for years, but I've come around to it. You know, it's slower, it's catchier. I'm fine with that. But I had the Legacy early on. I had New Order early on, so I got a lot of nostalgia for them. They're great albums. Low and The Gathering are definitely my favorites overall. In The Gathering, it's mostly because Dave Lombardo just puts on a fucking clinic. Absolutely destroys the whole room with his drumming on that album. But yeah, of the American bands being discussed, Slayer always far and away. You know, I heard the first album I got because of my age was Seasons in the Abyss, first metal album I ever bought, and just heard War Ensemble, and that like just drilled a hole in my head and poured battery acid and like hot magma in. But yeah, then I would say within a couple months of getting Seasons, I got Rain and Blood, And that album changed my life. Hearing Rain and Blood just changed my fucking life. It's like, yep, this is what I'm all about. I'm going to be doing this. I want to be spending all my money as an adult flying to European countries to see bands that only 5 people have heard of, and having a compile room full of fucking records and vinyl and 85 zillion black shirts. I blame Rain and Blood for all of that. Then I ended up getting everything else. And there was even like a couple years where I couldn't listen to Rain and Blood because I just played it so many fucking times growing up that I needed like a break from it. But now I'm good again. I'm back up.
Thankfully, it's only 20-something minutes long, right? So you can
just play it over and over. The German bands, Sodom is definitely my favorite of the bunch. They're the one band where I like everything they've done, from Inside of Evil all the way up to the most recent stuff. Like we mentioned, I was very happy to see them in Texas a couple weeks ago, although I saw them in Norway like 2 years ago, so it wasn't like the first time I'd seen them in a while. Love the live performances. Love that they got Frank Blackfire back. He was the guitarist of Persecution Mania, Agent Orange, like their most famous era, like 86, 87 to like around 90. I just love everything about them. I love, like Bryce said, Code Red or M16, great albums. And that was right around the turn of the millennium, like 2000, when a lot of these bands were kind of fucking off back then. I wasn't a 98, 99, 2000. Not a good time for thrash metal. Very few of these bands were doing good or putting out stuff that like will reflect. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Sodom, they were fucking full force, 100%, just killing it. It's not soft. It doesn't make any like overtures to like ballads. It's just total full force. Destruction, I'm gonna go with the earliest stuff. Sentence of Death, Infernal Overkill. It's my favorite. I love the sloppiness of it. Mike, I'm gonna say the guitarist Mike Siffringer, one of my favorite thrash guitarists ever, because nobody sounds like that guy. He's like almost like Piggy from Voivod, or I even want to say Mustaine. You hear him, you're like, you can immediately tell who wrote that riff. You can immediately tell that style. Tankard, yeah, I'm the same with you guys. Chemical Invasion, Zombie Attack. I listened to a couple newer songs for this show. It all sounds similar. It all sounds good. I'm not going to be running out to buy a lot of it, but Kreator, I got some interesting opinions on. Pleasure to Kill. It's one of my favorite albums of all time, by far. Fucking love it. But a lot of the early stuff is very good. Endless Pain, Terrible Certainty, Extreme Aggression, Coma of Souls. That's about where I stop. And then I'm with Kreator, probably an unpopular opinion. I kind of hold them like I hold Metallica. Like after Coma of Souls, I don't like a single fucking thing they did. Not one bit. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So,
alrighty. Chris, how about you?
It's a tough one. To me, it's 3-on-3 because I don't give a fuck about Tankard. But I do like the early stuff from Kreator, Sodom, and Destruction, and I don't give a fuck about Metallica. I did like the old stuff, but I haven't listened. I have not put on a Metallica record in probably 20 years. So it's 3 versus 3. But when you changed the lineup of the U.S. bands, I got to go Slayer. That's my second favorite band outside Sabbath. So there's nobody like Slayer. So I'm going Slayer and the U.S. side. Although it's funny, quick story. You guys mentioned in some of the Sodom records, and this is a sort of thing that thankfully someone like our young friend Bryce will never have to deal with. In 1988, Sodom were supposed to be coming over for their first U.S. tour, which was for Persecution Mania. This was before Agent Orange had come out. So my buddy Tom was like, hey, my friend Mary from Primeval is driving out to Frank Cariola's Sundance to see Sodom play their first ever New York show. You want to go? I'm like, hell yeah, I'm in. So Mary picked Tom and me up. We drove out to Frank Cariola's Sundance in 1988, which was like a 90-minute drive, the tolls and gas and everything. After, and the Jersey band Hades was opening up, and after we paid to get in, they were like, oh, no, Sodom's not playing tonight. Hades is headlining.
Oh,
but, of course, with no internet and you're in the fucking Stone Ages, we were like, oh, well, that sucks. And yes, Sodom never came over till America until, I think, 2002. But yeah, that's my quick, almost saw Sodom, but they didn't actually leave Germany.
That still happened to me in the internet era, Chris, because you'll probably remember this. In 2002, they were Kreator and Destruction, ironically, were supposed to play the Chance Poughkeepsie.
Yeah, I was there.
And we drove up there. I got there, and they're like, yeah, the show's not happening. You're like, but I'm here. I want to see the bands. I drove here. Yeah, but they're not playing.
I was gonna say
Yeah,
you're 100% right. Yeah, I drove with a buddy who came from Long Island. Right, we drove up together and we didn't know. Right, and the
didn't
internet
say
was in its
shit.
infancy, and then we found out. We were like, oh fuck. So then we went back home, and then he had to come up again, like a month or 6 weeks later, because
Yeah,
then they
did
did
play.
reschedule the show. And if I'm not mistaken, Scout, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't the tour originally Sodom, Kreator, and Destruction? But Sodom never made it to America on that run. It was just Kreator and Destruction.
Yeah, Sodom just dropped off. But it
Yeah.
was still the other two. And then
Still the other two.
I was
And-
waiting in line. They're like, yeah, the show's not happening. Like, what the fuck? I'm here.
And
I
I-
want beer. I want to watch Sodom.
I swear, when they did that makeup show, and there was like 50 people there.
When they did the makeup show, I got there obviously early. When Destruction played the Chance, because they played first, so Destruction and then Kreator, I was the only person in the pit area watching
I
Destruction.
believe it.
So, like,
That show was really poorly attended.
they were just playing to me. And then by the time Kreator went on, there was like 10 more people in there.
Yeah.
Destruction
That was-
played a whole set to me, which, you know.
That was a bad one.
Nothing wrong with that, right?
I was
First
there.
concert.
And Chris, funny story about the Sundance thing. So that particular show, Hades and Sodom, I was at the next weekend show. What they did was they took all those unused ticket stubs,
Yes.
crossed off Sodom and Hades, and I was a Warlock or Anthrax. I have it, and I have that original ticket stub from the show that you.
That is too funny.
But they crossed it off and they wrote in the two other bands that were playing.
Get out of here.
Well,
There we
but
go.
hold on, Rob. What Pete's story? They didn't just do it for Sodom. They did it for every show.
That's saving money.
I used to go to the Sundance quite a bit. So like I have in my ticket book tons of tickets. So like like I remember going to the Sundance to see Motorhead and Manowar, but the ticket says like Ludachrist from like a week earlier because that was a common thing. But that's funny that you have the ticket of the show that I was supposed to see and went to but didn't actually see.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I have to go pull it out, but I think
That sucks because
Warlock.
Sodom were really fucking good 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
And they played all the songs. They played songs from Persecution Mania and Agent Orange, and I liked it a lot.
Well, I did break down and I grabbed a ticket for the Brooklyn show. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'll worry
I'll
about
be
it
there.
then.
Ralph will be there. Nick will be there.
Nice. Yeah, this will be my 6th time seeing them. I've seen them a couple times in Germany, and I guess this will be my 3rd time seeing them in the States.
I'm seeing him in Maryland Death Fest in a month, so that'll be my
Nice.
5th time seeing him in the fall.
Yeah, the only time I caught them at BB King.
BB Kings, so 2002 or 3.
Yeah, it was my
like
birthday.
2005.
My birthday, and I got completely shit-faced drunk because I was hanging with Fin Troll. You don't want to hang with a bunch of guys from Finland, man.
No.
They drank me under the table, and
That's the first time I met Nick, and Nick had every beer on the East Coast that night.
my
And
God.
he don't remember meeting me, but I remember meeting him.
I left halfway through Sodom 6 because I was so drunk. I was like, I got to get on the train and get out of here. I'm gonna die in this place. So yeah, unfortunately. Ralph, how about you? What side of the fence are you on?
I gotta quickly go back to the stories of like no internet and going to shows. The worst one for me was War was playing on a pier in New York City. It was an outside show on Halloween. It was like a nor'easter. It was raining, and we drove up and down the West Side Highway for like 2 hours looking for this. It got canceled, but there was no way of knowing. So we just drove in this horrible rainstorm back and forth, and then we finally just went home. We couldn't find any sign of the show. And then another time I went to see the Circle Jerks at some place down in the city and get all the way down there, and the place is closed. The show was canceled like 2 weeks earlier, but no internet, no way of really, no one's calling you up to tell you. We didn't have to getting tickets there. I've had a couple other ones where like it sold out. I went all the way to Lemore's. It was like Anthrax, Crumbsuckers, and Cro-Mags. Get all the way to Lemore's and it sold out. And like we would have known it was sold out a week ahead before, but we didn't know, and we went there. But the Kreator Destruction show at the Chance, I was telling Pete off camera the other day about it. That show, I had like 10 people at my house all partying, getting psyched for the show. And we didn't have the internet to tell us it got canceled. But one of my friends that was up there, I believe it was Steve Levin, he called me up from up there saying, hey, don't come up here. It's canceled. And we were just like, oh my God. But luckily we didn't drive up there. But that night I got so drunk and so pissed off that the show didn't happen, that when I woke up the next day, I had shaved my head overnight, and it was the only haircut I had since I was in high school. And I woke up with a bald the next day.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with
Yeah.
that.
I grew it back. It started growing back, and I was like, "What do I got to do? I got to go to a barber shop now." And what the fuck kind of haircut do I just let it grow right back. And
Let it go.
never got it cut again. But so yeah, I went to this topic a little differently. I made like charts, and I got my German chart. I looked at it as like two teams. You can't. It was hard to have four bands like going against each other. So it's like the team 1 and team 2, and I had it like as 3 quarters. I had the 80s, the 90s, and then the 2000s. But yeah, the 80s is the best era for all of these bands. All 4 Metallica albums I really loved. I only really loved the first 2 Megadeth albums. The third one was okay, but I didn't like love it. All 4 Slayer albums in the 80s were unbelievable. Testament, I bought the Legacy, and by the time the second album came out, I really was already like kind of done with them. Tankard, I really like those 3 albums. Like I said, Destruction, those 3 albums are unbelievable to me. All 4 Kreator, I even like the Extreme Aggression. I thought they were still great at that time. And the 3 Sodom albums are really amazing. So then if I was gonna, like, I had it so it was the 90s were like a separate category. But if I look into the 90s, Tankard, I'm really not too familiar with the 90s stuff. And Destruction had nothing in the 90s. They had 2 horrible albums to me. Kreator, I did not like their 90s output at all. I didn't like any of the Coma Souls, was the last one I got, but it was such a step down from what they were doing. And those other albums, I mean, going back to some of them, they're not that bad, but I like them better later on. They pick it up later on. Sodom was great in the 90s. They had 6 albums, really productive. But then Slayer, yeah, you know, that them in there made it hard because they're one of the fans to me too. But I have to go with the Germans for this because they just had more. I added up the numbers; they had more classic albums for me that I still go back to and I still love. And how they opened the doors for like the death metal sound. Like to me, Persecution was one of the early death metal albums. And it's still close though because those first 4 Metallica albums are really important to me. And I agree with Scott. Killing Is My Business is my favorite Megadeth album. When that came out, it kicked ass. I love Peace Cells, but Killing has always been my favorite. But I got to go with the Germans for the first half of this.
Okay. Rob, how about you? I think I know where you're going with there.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I'm going with the American bands. The German bands for me, you know, I don't know as much as you guys do about them. So to make it real simple, you know, I don't have all their albums and all that stuff. Whereas the other bands, I have all their albums pretty much. I'm different than you guys because, you know, I'm still, I don't know if it's my age. I don't know what it is. I love Testament. I mean, Testament is my favorite band. You know, Slayer, of course, and Metallica and Megadeth are the ones that really started it all. But if I had to choose right now, you know, all the early stuff is great. Everybody that talked about the early stuff is all great. We all know that. But I gotta say, Megadeth and Testament and the later years have done pretty good. You know, like I was talking to Bryce about with the Dystopia and the newest album, and Testament's last few albums have been pretty good. That Titan's Creation is really a great album. I think, yeah, and we didn't mention Death Angel at all. I mean, Death Angel is another great band.
Yeah,
from California. I mean, you know, they don't get a lot of love, and they've been around since what, 90s or late 80s, right?
80,
Ultraviolence was like 87, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
87,
they've been around for a long
86.
time.
Yeah.
It was pretty early.
I gotta tell you, I was impressed by them when I saw them last year. They were good. You know, they have a long set, but they were good. So, but for me, you know, and Testament Low, that album for me is, somebody else said it about, I think Brian said it about Chuck's vocals on that. I never heard him go so deep with his vocals. He does it a little bit on Titans on a couple songs, but on that album, he was hitting those growls and stuff. And that's why I love that album. For me, that was something different that they did. They switched gears, and for the '90s, that was a big deal because the '90s, as we know, was not time for metal. You know, grunge had taken over, and although I have to say though, when I've been listening to the Sodom a lot now, you know, since we did this, and it's good stuff, man. It really is. I just, you know, it takes sometimes a couple of listens. You know, I listen to so much music, it's just sometimes, you know, it's catching on. It's definitely catching on. But I got to go with the California bands. You know, I mean, it's what I grew up with too. So
Yeah, I hear it. So Bryce, how about you? Is your supreme love for Megadeth going to bias your choice here?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely like the California bands better. But I do like the German stuff quite a bit, and we did mention Holy Moses briefly. I love them. But yeah, I think Megadeth kind of adapted with the times the best, honestly. If we take Risk isn't really good, obviously, but like Cryptic Writings, I think is an awesome album. A lot of great melodic stuff on there. Kind of radio-ish sounding songs did really well. I think they did great with that. But yeah, I love first 7 Megadeth albums, and then up through the 2000s are great. I don't think I mentioned Slayer before, but of course their early stuff is awesome. Seasons in the Abyss is my favorite by them. Um, but yeah, I think overall, just easily for me is the American bands.
Yeah, I would lean slightly to the California bands, I think. Just because those early runs for all the 4 of them are just so great. I mean, it's just there's no way to deny it. Not that the Germans aren't, but and because I have so much history with the American bands, California bands. But I think honestly, I think I listen more to the German bands these days when you look at all of these albums. But that's more because I think that because I had a lot of like I didn't start getting Sodom albums till later, but I think like Kreator and Destruction, I was buying all those when they were coming out. But obviously I was just totally into Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Testament, you know, and Exodus and Heathen and all those other bands. But so I will give the slight edge there on the early stuff. However, to kind of finish off our conversation, if we're looking at stuff of the last 30 years, you know, we know those couple of albums that Metallica put out after the Black Album, right? And then they come back later on and they put out stuff like this to say, oh, we kind of remember how it's done. We're going to go and try and return to the old style of music. You know, I think some people have accepted it. Some people are kind of like, nah, that you're trying too hard. It doesn't feel real. I think to me, Megadeth kind of slipped a little bit after Euthanasia. Have some good songs and maybe not so strong albums, but their last, 5 or 6 albums, really good. I think Testament is making some of the best music of their career, to be honest. I don't find the last few Slayer albums all that interesting. I think after Divine Intervention is when I kind of checked out there. But on the German side, I mean, Kreator to me has been putting out really solid records, maybe not as good as their early stuff. I think Sodom's albums are terrific. I don't think Sodom has ever really released a bad album. I even like the recent Destruction albums quite a bit. Ralph and I went over that the other day. They've got some banging albums that have come out since 2000 when Schmier rejoined the band. And Tankard, like a couple of you said, Tankard albums all kind of sound the same. They're all kind of fun. They're all good, right? So if I was looking at the last 30 years, you know, post like, you know, 1995 or so, I give it to the Germans. Not by a ton, but just because I think overall across the board, most of them have the 4 have just stronger albums overall. So I don't know, Tony, do you agree with that, or would you go the other way?
Well, I kind of mapped this out, kind of like what Ralph did. Originally, I wasn't sure how we were going to take this on, but yeah, I mean, Metallica. I mean, after the Black Album, I can't say that I ever listened to any of that stuff. I do own Reload and Load. For some reason, I've kept them in the collection, but after that, I never bought anything else by them. I heard some stuff. It's like you said, they try to recapture some of that magic of some of those later records like Death Magnetic, and everybody was raving about it. And I was like, it's contrived. It just sounds like they just came up with trying to be heavy to be for the sake of being heavy again. But I have a lot of respect for Metallica. I really do. I had posted something the other day about that Elton John thing they did the other night where they played Funeral for a Friend. I was like, you know, Metallica might be my favorite cover band because all their covers kick ass. I mean, the Metallica record that I probably revisit the most besides Ride the Lightning is I go back, I listen to Garage Incorporated a lot. The Merciful Fate medley is just fucking badass, you know. But moving on to Megadeth, you know, like I said, I was never huge Megadeth. I don't like dislike Megadeth. I like a lot of their stuff. But I never heard Euthanasia. I never heard Risk. Oh, maybe I did. I think I did get a promo of that one time, but I evidently didn't stick with me. I was working at Sanctuary Records when they did World Needs a Hero and The System Has Failed. So I'd heard those records and, you know, dealing with Dave and stuff during that period. Some of the later stuff that they've done in recent years, I don't own any of it, but I've heard it and it's good. It's good, solid stuff. It's heavy. It's kind of reminds me of some of their early days stuff. Moving to Slayer, kind of just like Pete said, kind of after Divine Intervention, I kind of lost interest. I do own God Hates Us All. I remember buying that when it came out on that fateful day when it was released, and the Testament. I think, you know, like I said, Low was a great comeback for them. It was a heavy record, and the few that followed, you know, they were really going for a more aggressive sound. And when Alex Skolnick came back and they put out the Formation of Damnation, and then they did Dark Roots of Earth and Titans of Creation, these three albums, I listened to them quite a bit, especially this last one, Titans of Creation. It's one of their best records. And I like the way Chuck, he sings the aggressive vocals, but he also kind of sings like he used to sing on the earlier records as well. He kind of mixes it up. And these are just top notch. I think these are even better than their first couple of records. Just great stuff. Then moving on to the European bands, to German bands, Tankard. I've never heard anything in later day from Tankard. I did listen to a little bit of Pavlov's Dog, the most recent one, to prepare for this assignment, and it sounded just like the Tankard from the past. It was no different. Kreator, that is, you know, I remember kind of like when we were talking about bands kind of changing. I remember when Kreator put the Renewal album out. I guess that was about, what was that, like 93 or so?
92.
Yeah. I love Coma of Souls. That was a great record. So I'm on that tour. First time I ever saw them with, I think Morgoth was touring with them. That was a great show. But I remember Renewal coming out and everybody's like, have you heard the new Kreator? It's like he's changed his vocal style. He's got more of this bark than that raspy thrash voice that he was known for. And that was kind of when I got off from Kreator. I remember hearing some of the later stuff. They had some kind of stuff that was just kind of very experimental. They had one album, I remember, it had a kind of a gothy kind of feel to it at times. And but when they came out, I think it was 2001 with Violent Revolution, I was like, okay, this is a great return to form for this band. And it was great. I actually saw them on this tour. Enemy of God, the follow-ups, great record. And I've got several of the other ones since then, right up to Hate Uber Owls. It was the one that came out in 2022. I've got some of those on digital that I listen to in the car a lot, and they're just a great band. I mean, they have continued putting out solid releases for like the last, 18 years or so. And so then we'll move on to Destruction. And, I watched you guys' ranking of the Destruction albums yesterday, which is very good. I never knew about, I knew Crack Brain was a change of their style and all, but I never knew that they did some albums that sound like Pantera. I've never heard those. I'm probably not missing anything, I guess, from you guys, what you guys are telling me. But I remember I was writing for Zine, getting promos, and this came in, all hell breaks loose.
Right.
And I was like, wow, this sounds like old Destruction. And I saw them on this tour, actually. And everything just followed, the Antichrist, Metal Discharge. This one's Inventor of Evil. Some just great stuff. Like I said, they're like Kreator. They've come back and played a kind of style that they were playing in their early days. It's just like better production on this stuff now. So it's kind of hard to say. I mean, like I said, Testament out of the other pile is going to be the band that I think is still doing quality stuff to this day. But I got to lean with the Germans. for the more modern day stuff.
Cool.
Definitely in the same vein as what they made popular, what they're known for sure.
I think Mr. Scout's probably going to agree with that, right?
I thought I was gonna have to put this disclaimer at the beginning of the show, but I'll throw it up now. I love thrash metal. I own a metric cosmic fuck ton of thrash albums. But when it comes to the later day stuff by pretty much all of these bands and just like thrash in general, I don't know. I'm very picky, and I'll actually start with a quick thing. In 2022, Merciful Fate played. Many of us went to that down in the King's Theater in Brooklyn. That was a fun commute, wasn't it? And I also went down to see them in Philadelphia too. So Merciful Fate played. They were great. Kreator opened both shows. They were on the tour. They played, I'm just checking, they played about 9-10 songs. Every single song for the main part of the set was from 2001 and later. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, I would rather have a dentist drill going through my fucking head right now. Because like all these other bands, even Metallica, I mean, pretty much every band here, they play a good mix of stuff. Here's some old songs, some new stuff. Yeah. And I'm like, you guys have these amazing albums that basically, your legacy is built on that. And then you go forward from there. You're not going to play any of that? And then they came out for an encore and played 2 old songs. Like, there you go, you fucking peasants.
Flag of Hate.
Yeah, Flag of Hate. And I think the other one was Pleasure to Kill, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so Metallica, like I said, I don't know. I go to the first 4 albums I love. I'm one of those people, Pete, that I do not like the new albums. I heard them. I heard Death Magnetic. I heard most of the one after that, whose name I just
Hardwired to Self-Destruct.
Yeah, that's it. And I heard the first song that they did from 72 Seasons. I'm like, oh man, it's kind of like a Diamond Head riff. It's like this old new wave of British heavy metal riff. And like you guys are saying too, Metallica's got great taste. I don't like all the covers they did on Garage Inc., but like the choice of material and the choice of bands they pulled from, that's like someone's record collection. I'd be like, I want to fucking hang out at your house and have a couple beers with you. Like, doing a little Blue Oyster Cult, doing Merciful Fate, doing Nick Cave, doing Discharge. Like that's just Motorhead. That's a great taste in music, And of course all their old new wave of British heavy metal covers going back. They probably sold a couple Diamond Head records for them. But yeah, I'm a Testament, definitely one of the only bands of this group where the 90s stuff is my favorite. The newer stuff, it's cool. I don't own any of the albums past The Gathering, but every time I hear them, Formation, Damnation, Titans of Creation, it's good stuff. It's very solid. I just, you can't own everything. And a lot of these newer these old thrash bands or newer albums, I just never got to picking up the albums, with some exceptions. Megadeth is kind of the same boat. They did have some stinkers in there. Euthanasia actually is a great album. Because Countdown to Extinction was kind of, that to me was like, all right, Dave wants to write the Black Album. Not really a fan of Countdown. But I think with Euthanasia, he kind of fucked off from that a little. And it's just more of like this pure heavy metal album, which is kind of out of character for 1994. Come out with an album like that. But I don't know. If you never heard Euthanasia, I could easily recommend that. That's like my favorite album.
I've never listened to it. I know the hits from it, but that's
it's good.
Yeah, I have to check it out.
It's all great.
Easily my favorite album post Rust in Peace. I think it's really good. But then they did they had a couple albums where I wasn't into them, but then they come out with Endgame, which I'm like, wow, this is crazy. This is like Rust in Peace, full force double bass, that really intricate, guitar trade-offs that, reason like most people love Megadeth. And the last couple have been good too. The newest one, I didn't buy it, but yeah, it's solid. It's got, the production's a little too clean for me, but for a band of that caliber and that size, what am I complaining about? Like that's just who they are. So that's fine. I would say, so who else we got here? Yeah, going over to Germany now. Did I cover all the American bands? I forgot. Oh, Slayer. Yeah, Slayer. I own every Slayer album. They were my favorite band for a long time. So even when they started putting out stuff that was like, I still bought it just because, I don't know. I think you can make a really good album from everything. Divine Intervention, 1994. I love that album. I fucking love it. Everything after Divine, I think there's one really good album, like cherry picking all those songs from those albums. I don't think anybody said the name so far. I know God Hates Us All's come up. I kind of like Diabolos Musica, but just because I'm 41, when I was getting into Slayer, that was like the newest album for my age. So I bought it, obviously. I know people bag on Kerry King a lot, for his fucking big space goggles, welder's glasses, but and his fucking chin a fucking dead animal strapped to his chin. But that was mostly a Jeff Hanneman album. Like most of the credits on Diabolical Music go to Jeff Hanneman. And you know, they were down tuning. It's got that 90s feel to it, which they got bagged on a lot. Like, oh, they're trying to sound like a new metal band. They're trying to sound like Pantera, Machine Head. I don't know, maybe, but it's got some good songs on it. I don't really mind it. Perversions of Pain's a good song. Bitter Peace. I go back to it every now and then. I'm like, you got some shitters, but not the worst album in the world. And to me, that holds true for every album after that. Some good songs and some kind of like, all right, this is kind of whatever. Going over to the German side, I'll be honest. I don't like the new Kreator stuff at all. I've had many arguments with Steve Keeler over this because he's a huge fan of Enemy of God when that came out in like early 2000s. And I heard it. He played it in Rock Fantasy a lot. People doing pinball there. And I'm like, Steve, you like it, you like it. You know, everybody's got different taste. I was never into it. Mill changed his vocals a little bit. There was definitely a period where they play a lot of new songs and then they do the old songs as like a medley. Like here's like 4 old songs just smashed together in 3 minutes or 4 minutes. And then, you know, that's all you get. Sodom, I think, probably the most consistently strong of all these bands. They had some stuff in the 90s where they were trying to sound like more like a punk band or like Motorhead. It's not bad. It's definitely not bad. But, you know, I think they were floundering a bit. And then they come back right at the end of the 90s, like Bryce said, Code Red, M16, absolute fucking beast. Just full force, super powered thrash. M16 is awesome.
It is great. Yeah.
Right, a concept album about Vietnam. Yeah, that's a little different. You know, I don't think anybody was expecting that, but musically, it's a fucking beast. Destruction, I'm going to admit, the last time I saw Destruction was at Maryland Death Fest. I think that's the one Chris went to, 2022. I saw Aloe there, right? So I had a couple of beers. I was a little buzzed. They get up on stage, and they killed it. They were fucking great. They sounded great. The pit was going wild. They played all the old hits. Great set. And then almost at the end of the set, I'm squinting a little bit. And I'm like, wait, where's Mike? Because Mike's been their guitarist since like 1983, right? Yeah, he left the band, and I'm like, I didn't know what to do with myself. And they brought in 2 guitarists to replace Mike, but I'm like, but it was so good. What? I don't know. I like 15 minutes right to sit down and like I was opening up Google, like Mike left the band. He's the guy. Like he's been in the band. He's like Mustaine leaving Megadeth, and Megadeth's like, we're gonna keep going with like somebody else. Like what? And then this was after seeing their set and loving it. So I'm like, well, I guess they still sound good. And they played the songs like really well. So I don't know. I still feel kind of weird about that. But the new albums are good. I haven't heard that. I think they put out a newest album without Mike. Something real. I have not heard that yet.
Diabolic. It's very good.
Yeah, it's good.
I'll have to check
it out. It's good.
But they have an album. I will say it hasn't come up yet.
That's
In like
pretty good.
2001 or 2, they put out an album called The Antichrist, which is fucking
Good record.
awesome. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is so good. I think it's one of their best albums. It's got that modern production. Yeah, that's it. But it's fine. There's some absolute gems on that. Thrash Till Death, Bullets from Hell. Yeah, it's good stuff. And then like Tony was saying, the Tankard stuff. I only listen to some of the newer stuff just to prep for the show, and it's good. But very consistent band. Actually, so probably more consistent than Sodom. I'm just not as familiar. Of these bands, I'd say just from the Sodom, just pushing things over, I'm gonna go with the German bands for the newer stuff, just because I love the new stuff so much. They brought actually Frank Blackfire back in their last album, Genesis XIX, I think was the name. It's fucking great, and they played a bunch of those songs in Texas, and the people just ate it up like a fucking slice of apple pie. It was good stuff. So
I bet. I've never seen them. I always wanted to.
they're coming around, hopefully, and allegedly, I mean, they're going to do Chicago. They're doing like Chicago and New York. I think there's a third show peppered in there, but allegedly they're going to play more shows now that they finally got the visa issue and all the immigration shit figured out, and they can come over here. I don't know what the fucking problem was for years. There was a whole bullshit where there was 3 separate times where they were supposed to play Maryland Death Fest, booked them as a headliner, and then like 2 months they're like, guess what? Sodom's not playing. And the third time it happened, the promoters were kind of like, we're not ever fucking bringing them back again. Fuck these guys. They were real salty about it. This is probably going back about a decade. They're playing Maryland Death Fest next month, so I guess all wounds were healed. I don't know how much money was spent on immigration lawyers and visa lawyers, but you know what? I know they get the States because I just saw them in fucking Texas. So
sometimes it's one member that'll hold them up as well. You don't know,
Yeah, I didn't
Could
really
have been the old guitarist that Frank replaced, maybe.
It's very possible, yeah, because I know they had some membership. Actually, I think the whole band except for Tom swapped over. So that could very well be it. But they fucking destroyed. So if they come around, you have a chance. I recommend it 8 billion%. Yeah, it was a good set. New songs, old songs, but it all went over great.
Cool. Chris, you on the German side for the latter stuff? Or-
Yeah. I don't want this episode to be 3 hours long, and I got a date with a raspberry jelly donut. So yeah, Team Germany. Let's wrap this up.
That
Look at
sounds
the
good,
Germans,
Chris.
yeah.
Sounds like a winner.
Ralph, you with Germany as well?
Yeah. Yeah, like Testament is the one band I think in the 90s and the 2000s that got better. But yeah, the Germans are way more consistent. All the Tankard albums are very similar, and the Destruction that we just ranked, they're all really good and they very consistent. Same thing with Sodom. Kreator gets back on my radar with Violent Revolution. I like Enemy of God, Hordes of Chaos. They're everything they've done since the 2000s. I back on board with. Slayer. I like God Hates Us All and Christ Illusion. World Painted Blood and Replantless are a little not as great, but I still like them, you know. And I like the 90s albums by Slayer too. So Slayer's the one band that like keeps bringing me back. Because Metallica, you know, I like Death Magnetic. I thought it was I guess I just really wanted to be a Metallica fan again. I miss being a Metallica fan because they were so important to me when I was a kid. That when they came out with Death Magnetic, I liked that album. And Hardwired in 72 Seasons, there's parts of it that I like. Megadeth, that last album we had to do an album battle on Rock Fantasy Files, and I fell asleep listening to it the first time. Second time, it was like a chore to get through that album to me. I hated it. I thought his vocals sucked. It sounded like he was just talking the whole time. I heard some good guitar parts here and there, but you know, he had like Ice-T on there, so I couldn't stand it. But I did like a United Abominations. I had a friend that was a big Megadeth fan, so I would burn all these albums when they came out, and I would give them all a try. And some of those ones in the 2000s I thought were good. You know, he's trying to beat Thrash again, but doesn't compare to what the German bands were doing. So I'm going Germany. All it's a sweep for me with Germany.
Cool. Real quick, Robin, Bryce, you guys are probably going to go on the U.S. side, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't.
Testament and Megadeth alone, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean,
yeah.
only because I don't know the German bands like you guys do. So, you know, but I have to agree about the Kreator. I love that album, the Violent Revolution. I posted it before. I love that album. It's a great album. Really. I mean, I tried to listen, you know, some of these bands, they have so many freaking albums, and you're like, you're listening to the songs, you're like, yeah, that's why a lot of times for me personally, I'll go to a download and I'll download the songs that I love, and I just download those songs. I don't download the whole album, you know. With the original bands, of course, I had all those albums, you know, Slayer and Megadeth and Testament and everybody, you know, I had all those albums. I have to agree with one thing Ralph said, even though I didn't like Death Magnetic, but I did like some of Hardwired. Not everything, but I liked a couple songs on it. I thought they were good. But, you know, again, I think that the problem with Metallica is they became commercial, you know, and I don't know, too commercial for me. But the early stuff was the best. And I'm going to listen to more of the German bands because, you know, between the show you guys had yesterday and everybody talking about them today, and like I said, I've been listening to the 40 Years of Sodom, and I got to say, it's really good. It's growing on me. So
Good catalog.
you know, maybe ask me in a couple of months and I'll, you know, things will change a little bit, but we'll see.
So Bryce, to take us out, do you like Death Magnetic, Hardwired, and 72 Seasons?
You know, honestly, surprisingly, I do like Death Magnetic pretty good because like it came out when I was 12 and I got it on CD. So I actually really dig it. Like All Nightmare Long, I think it's a pretty good song. There's some other good ones on there. The last two are just pretty generic and just mediocre. I find that with a lot of modern thrash, but some of these bands do have good stuff. Like Testament, I think their stuff's amazing. Megadeth, the musicianship is just top tier. When you got Alex Skolnick, Mustaine, Chris Broderick, all these guys, and those two bands are just amazing guitar players, which I love. So that kind of puts it over the top for me.
Okay, cool.
Well, that exactly what Bryce said is what I was going to say about Testament, because Skolnick is, I mean, he's an incredible guitarist. Not taking anything away from Eric, because Eric is great too. But I mean,
He's a secret weapon, right? I mean,
He's a
that's
secret weapon. Those solos on there. I mean, in fact, I had Testament on today. Was walking and I'm just like, I'm walking. I'm doing the air guitar. I'm like, people must think I'm out of my mind, which I am, but that's okay. I mean, so that's why Testament for me is my band. So
That's why I think the Gathering's the best because I mean Eric's good and Chuck's great, but when they have Steve Giorgio, Dave Lombardo, and James Murphy backing you up,
Yeah.
that's a fucking powerhouse. And those guys carry their weight throughout that whole album. So
yeah,
For sure.
they just gel.
Lombardo was killer on that.
Testament gels well with like other guys coming, and it's like they don't steal. Like, all right, you're playing with us, but you shut the fuck up and sit in
Yeah.
the corner. Like it's well incorporated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Gene's drumming is amazing too on those
Yeah.
other recent albums.
So there you have it, everybody. California Thrash versus German Thrash. Let us know what you think of all these bands and these two kind of sets of thrash down in the comments below. And we'll see you back here in 2 weeks for another episode of Hudson Valley Squares. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube all together. All the damn
All the damn
time.
time.
Please subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell to get alert of all of our content as it posts. And please do hit the like button before you leave. For Count Ralphus, Rob Lasante, Chris Allo, Bryce Barraza, Tony Dio Leonard, and Mr. Scow, Ryan Scow, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Listen to Sodom. Fuck yeah.
There you go.